Alright, back for another tutorial, so let's get straight into it. Today I'm going to teach you guys how to create depth inside of your mix, how to fill up your whole stereo image field and panning things left and right, and just try to create a more dynamic mix down. Sounds like a lot of artists nowadays are just putting a lot of their sounds, their bass patches, their percussions all in the center of their mix, and you have a whole stereo field to play with. And I really encourage you guys to just start utilizing it as much as you can, and it can really make your track sound a lot more interesting than it already is. So today what we're going to do is we're going to use one of my tracks as an example. This is a track off of one of my previous albums, Smile, The World Needs It. It's a liquid drum and bass tune, but I have a lot of information going on. It's a perfect example to show you guys how I'm not only panning things, but how I'm also using a directional mixer and how I'm pulling things in more mono and more stereo, and how I decided to create that mix and that atmosphere for this specific track. So hopefully this helps, and let's jump straight into it. So this is the tune. Right, so that's like the first part of the drop, and then on this last part of the drop, I also added this counter melody squeaky noise too that I think fits really well with the melody that's going on, but I think it only sits well because of how I pan them and how I'm using my stereo depth to kind of make them cohesive and sit together inside of the mix. So here, go ahead and check this out. Okay, so the first thing that I have going on in pan are my strings. I'm pushing my strings more to the left, and what I advise is that you guys always use a directional mixer. Now, no matter if you're using Logic, if you're using Ableton, there's always going to be some type of directional mixer, and if not, then Ozone actually has a free directional mixer where you can push things out more stereo or bring them in more mono. Now, a directional mixer is going to do exactly just that. It's going to widen things, or it's going to bring it more towards the center. So utilize them as much as you can. Put them on every bass patch, on every instrument, on every sound. So then that way you can really have control of the depth on how far it's going to be sitting inside of your mix. So not only using that, but also use a correlation meter as well. So this is indicating that no matter if the line is balancing between this area, then your track is going to sound good in stereo and also in mono. So the further you go +1, the more mono it is. Now the further you go -1, that's how far you're pushing out the track stereo. Now if you get anywhere around this area, that's indicating that your sound is virtually going to disappear audibly too inside of your mix. So you really want to stay away from this area. Whenever we're creating bass patches or synths or violins, they usually tend to get pushed off pretty far stereo. So we have to correct them by pushing them back in just a little bit. Now every sound is going to be different, so you really got to loop the channel and then play it to see where the meter is sitting at. So right there is pretty far stereo, and I think it fits really well right there just because of my melody and my Reese bass that's going on. I want those to sit more in the center of the mix, and then all the filler, all the atmosphere elements, I want to sit on the outside of the mix. So my melody, let's go ahead and pop that open and take a look at that. With my melody, I have, let's see, correlation, directional mixer, yep. All right, let's go ahead and check that out. So as you can see, my melody is super mono. And that's right where I prefer my melodies to be, especially if it's something pokey or has a boing to it, or even just a fast arp. I really prefer for them to stick in the middle, so then that way I can build all my other elements on the outside of it. So then that way I'm creating not only room, but I'm creating depth and utilizing my stereo field and creating space inside of the mix to make things sound a little bit more interesting. And also, you're allowing more room for your kick and your snare. And that's really important too. If you really want them to cut through, yeah, you can sidechain this and that, but the more space you create for them, the more fluent and cohesive it's all going to sound when it's all meshed together and once you slap a limiter on top of it. So that's my melody, centered, and then let's go ahead and check out my Reese bass as well. Now my Reese bass is pretty damn centered. I have it panned +2 to the right, just a slight bit, and honestly you probably couldn't even tell the difference if it was center or not, but let's go ahead and look at this. Now it's bouncing somewhere in this nice sweet middle space where it sounds really good with the rest of the mix, and honestly, looking at it now, I'm just going to pull it in just a tiny bit more. This is a real good strategy to use for dubstep. Now, dubstep, when you're creating bass patches, they're more centered than anything because they're not using too many voices or unison whenever you're creating the bass patch. But the thing is that if all your bass patches on your drop are all centered, then it's not going to sound as wide or entertaining, and especially if you have hi-hats too. I always pan my hi-hats either left or right, or if you're using more than one set of hi-hats or loops, then definitely pan left and right. Then you're utilizing your stereo depth. You can never go wrong with too much panning, honestly. Just kind of be moderate in how much you're applying, because you don't want to throw things all the way left or throw things all the way right, unless that's like your real goal. If it's like a sample that you just want to cut in real quick and you're just chopping it hard left or chopping it hard right, that might sound pretty cool. But for instruments that are always consistent, like your hi-hats, or if you have a melody or a pad going on, just push them slightly to the left or to the right, not too much, and then just find a sweet spot that just sounds good to you. And then when you listen to everything together, it's going to sound a lot more interesting. Okay, so I'm just going to show you my hi-hats real quick to give you guys a quick example for percussion bass, and then we're going to wrap it up and get on out of here. Okay, so my hi-hats, I have 3 different types of loops going on for the drop. Now, my main one is panned slightly to the left, -1. But also, if I open up my directional mixer on all of these, what you're going to see is that they're all not completely dead on mono. And that's what I love doing for my hi-hats too, because I feel like making your hi-hats completely 100% mono just sounds too electronic. Now, if you listen to like bands or if you listen to any other types of genres that have like a live drummer in it, you'll always hear cymbals and hi-hats are always panned and toms left and right. And even when you go see a live show, it's going to be the same way. The engineer is going to mix it the same exact way. Everything's not going to be completely centered except for the kick and the snare. So for my hi-hats, I got it pushed in about 0.30. And I found like that was a real nice area for the hi-hats to where it's still centered, it's still mono, but not absolutely and completely mono. And then after that, I have my accommodating hi-hat, which is pushed slightly to the right, 0.12. And let's go ahead and look at where it's sitting with that. So on this one, it's in a little bit more mono than the main hi-hat, and what I'm doing with that is that's creating depth, even if it's just a small portion. The fact that I'm panning it right, now it's making the hi-hats sound a lot bigger than they actually are, and it sounds like there's a lot more information going on than what there actually is. So let's go ahead and listen to that. It's just a lot more interesting. It's a lot more interesting than just keeping your hi-hats 100% mono the whole time. All right, so let's go ahead and hear the accommodating hi-hats that go on afterwards. And again, they're panned +7, just a little bit, just to create some depth. And let's go ahead and look at the directional mixer. They're at the same width size as the main hi-hat. So now, throughout the mix, you're going to be hearing the hi-hats on the right kind of going a little bit more centered and a little bit more out, and that's just going to create more depth. It's just going to make it more interesting. Now, you're not going to even notice or hear it if I didn't even tell you where they were sitting at inside of the mix, and that's the trick, right? So I'm creating this depth, and I'm actually tricking your brain as you're listening, and that's the whole part about how you can make your mix a lot more interesting than it already is. And there you have it. That's pretty much it for this tutorial. Just short and sweet. Just remember that everything has a layer and everything's like making a sandwich, right? You got to give everything its own dedicated frequency space. I hope this helps you guys a little bit in tightening down your mixes. I hope that you guys can utilize it a little bit more to kind of make your mix down sound a little bit more interesting than they already are. So if you guys have any more questions, go ahead and drop me a comment down below and I'll be happy to answer them. So with all that being said, I'll see you guys on the next tutorial. Yeah.